חזרנו. בשבועות האחרונים שמענו לא מעט על תוכנית המאה שנשיא ארצות הברית דונלד טראמפ מתכנן לקדם כאן אצלנו כדי לפתור את הסכסוך בין ישראל לפלסטינים. אז מה היא כוללת? מה בדיוק טראמפ מתכנן? אילו מחירים הוא הולך לבקש מישראל ואילו מחירים מהפלסטינים? מוקדם יותר היום אירחנו כאן באולפן את דניס, לשעבר שליח ארצות הברית במזרח התיכון, אדם שמכיר מקרוב את הניסיונות לפתור את הסכסוך. רוס הגיע לארץ להשתתף בכנס של מכון טרומן לציון 40 שנה להסכם השלום עם מצרים, שיערך ביום ראשון הקרוב באוניברסיטה העברית. הנה הראיון שקיימנו איתו מוקדם יותר היום. Ambassador Ross, thank you so much for being here. Now, you've been involved in some of the most intense negotiation aiming towards a peace deal here in the Middle East, and you're now an advisor to the National Security Council, so I wish to speak to you about Trump's so-called deal of the century. Let's watch things that President Trump said last September, meeting Prime Minister Netanyהו. Let's see.
There's nothing I would rather do than see peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I think lots of good things are happening. It will take a little time, as you know. It's taken plenty of time, many decades, and nothing's happened. I really believe something will happen. They say it's the toughest of all deals. When they talk about tough deals, they always say Israel and the Palestinians. That's the toughest of all deals. It is a dream of mine to be able to get that done prior to the end of my first term. I don't want to do it in my second term.
Ambassador Ross, to your understanding, is Trump's peace plan merely a general vision, or does it include a concrete measures such as borders, East Jerusalem, two-state solution?
Well, a couple points. First, I'm not an advisor to this administration.
Okay.
Served in many others, but I'm not an advisor to this administration. I have been reached out to by those within the administration, just as many people have been reached out to as they develop this plan. When the administration talks about the plan, they say it's going to be a detailed plan. They say many of the previous efforts failed, including ones I was involved in, because they were focused more on principles, and neither side really understood what they were signing up to or exactly what it meant. So I think their intent is to be detailed. How that will look, I don't know. They haven't revealed the details, but if you are dealing with the core issues, you're dealing with borders, you're dealing with Jerusalem, you're dealing with refugees, you're dealing with security. So if you're going to produce a plan that at this point is described as being something like 50 pages, it's going to have a lot of detail. We'll have to see exactly what it is.
Were you consulted by Jared Kushner or Jason Greenblatt?
I've certainly, yes. I mean, they have reached out to me, but to their credit, they reached out to a lot of people. I wouldn't exaggerate the role I've had with it. I would simply say, I think they've tried to learn from the past, and it's affected how they've tried to shape what they're doing. Clearly, they've wanted the context to be right before they presented the plan, and I think it's still a very difficult context.
East Jerusalem is the capital of the Palestinian state. Is that something that they're talking about, as far as you know?
They haven't.
Because that's a deal breaker regarding, you know, the Palestinians and the Arab world. So do you know if they're even negotiating?
The short answer is I don't know what's in the plan.
Yeah.
People who say they know are the people who aren't involved with it, and the people who know aren't talking about it. What is clear is that there has been an assumption within the administration that at a time when they can't talk to the Palestinian Authority, that they need some level of Arab support, which I think is true. They need some level of Arab support. There will not be Arab support for the plan if the plan doesn't provide for a state and if it doesn't provide for a capital for that state in some significant part of Arab East Jerusalem. No, the most you're going to get, by the way, from Arab leaders will be, this is a serious basis for negotiations. We have reservations. We have some questions, but it's a serious basis for negotiations. They're not going to come out and publicly say the Palestinians should accept this, but they will say it's a serious basis. Now, I mean, I should say, they might say it's a serious basis if it meets what I just described, because from their standpoint, for the Saudis in particular, without Jerusalem, there's no way they will stand up and say this is serious. If they were to say this is serious, that would put Abu Mazen in a very difficult position. It would be very hard for him to say no if you had a group of Arab leaders saying, we have questions, but it's a serious basis for talks.
I believe the same thing applies to Prime Minister Netanyahu. There were reports in the media saying the Trump administration will not pressure Prime Minister Netanyahu to concessions that will burden him politically. Is that your impression as well? Do you believe Prime Minister Netanyahu will be able to turn down such a deal?
I think it'll be hard for him to turn down such a deal because the Trump administration has done a lot for Israel. It's not just its recognition of Jerusalem and moving an embassy. In the UN, consistently, it has emphasized a structural bias against Israel. It supports Israel's right of self-defense whenever there is even limited conflict. It has withdrawn from the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, which is something that the Prime Minister was keen to see happen. So there's a whole body of actions by this administration that demonstrates it understands Israel's concerns, its needs, and even its predicament. So I think it won't be easy. I would say I would find it hard to imagine that he would simply say no to what's presented. He might say yes, but I find it hard to believe that he would say no. Now the question, of course, is we don't know exactly what's going to be in the plan. What we have heard consistently is that both Kushner and Greenblatt have said there'll be parts of the plan that the Israelis like and parts of it they don't like. There'll be parts of the plan that the Palestinians like and don't like. And everybody shouldn't prejudge what's in it. So when you hear there'll be parts you don't like, you have to think about what might those be.
Yeah. Well, speaking about parts you might not like, you've known Prime Minister Netanyahu for many years now. Looking back at his Bar-Ilan speech, the two-state solution, do you think he was willing to make compromises, or that it was just to buy time and that he wasn't really willing to go down that path?
I have known him a long time. I feel, certainly when I was dealing with him at different points, I felt he was willing to make compromises. I also think that his politics were different then. Frequently when I was dealing with him, he had a broader-based government. With a very narrow-based government, it would be difficult to contemplate some of the compromises that might be necessary.
Do you think he's willing to make those compromises now? He'll be able to do them?
With the current government, it's hard to see how he could, because many in that government would depart. So a narrow-based government, it's hard to imagine how he could make those kinds of compromises unless he was willing to change that government.
Do you think the corruption allegations are something that should be thought of during negotiations with the Israeli government?
You know, I would separate the two. You know, this is an internal process here, and if I were doing diplomacy,
it wouldn't affect.
You can't let it affect unless you see it constraining decision making. Then that has to influence what you do. But in that case, you would do less. You wouldn't do more. I will say this. I mean, you know, there are those who want to delegitimize Israel, and what's happening right now, whether you agree with it in Israel or you disagree with it, it is testimony to the fact that in Israel you have the rule of law and no one is above the law. It's a remarkable statement about Israel, and it singles Israel out as the only democracy in this part of the world. You can't imagine this happening to any other leader in an Arab country in this region. And it's a reminder for those who try to delegitimize Israel just what Israel is. It is a democracy, and it is governed by a rule of law and a separation of powers.
So it's not going to affect the negotiations. They're not going to, the Trump administration is not going to look at Netanyahu's government and say, well, he might not be here for a long time. We might not want to negotiate with this person.
Yeah, I don't think that's how they will look at it. I do think they made a conscious decision not to present the plan before the Israeli election. And I think they have had a kind of assumption that after the Israeli election, then the real issue would become, do you present it during the government formation process or do you wait until afterwards? And I think that's still an issue that probably hasn't been resolved yet. what we're seeing is the administration is making more of an effort to prepare the ground for presenting it. So you've seen more of an effort to talk about at least the economic side of the plan. Not to get into details, but to say there is an economic dimension to the plan.
Yes.
There was a tour that Kushner and Greenblatt made in the region, and I think that was clearly part of not presenting the whole plan, because they still, I think, fear some of the information leaking out and it creating a backlash in one place or the other. So they focused more on the economic side to say the economic side cannot be a substitute for a political outcome, but no political outcome can be sustainable unless it has an economic underpinning.
Ambassador Dennis Ross, thank you so much for talking to us today.
My pleasure.